And we are back with some more Seattle Kraken expansion draft speculation. And so far to at least this point in the series, I've gotten rather lucky that none of the players I've talked about have ended up getting traded off of their teams. I mean, Dumba's still with the Wild, Sam Bennett is somehow still a Flame, and the Laine Dubois trade happened before I talked about the Jets, and I haven't even talked about the Blue Jackets yet, so far so good. But as we get closer and closer to that April 12th trade deadline, that could certainly change, and if there is a team left before then that could screw this all up for me and trade somebody right after I make a video about them, it would probably be the Nashville Predators. By the way, if you do find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. Now, at least when it comes to the expansion draft anyway, the Nashville Predators could actually be a pretty interesting team to watch. Not that you would know that by actually watching them play this season, because things have definitely not gone the way they were hoping they would, but that actually plays a role in why they are such an interesting team when it comes to the expansion draft. Now, the Predators are certainly not fully out of the playoff picture just yet this season, but they do have a bit of an uphill battle to get back into it. So it will be interesting to see come the trade deadline, which is getting closer and closer, whether or not they'll be buyers, sellers, or maybe just not make any moves at all. And as far as that goes, and ultimately the effects it could have on Seattle and the expansion draft, well, that pretty much comes down to whether or not they decide to trade one of their top 4 defensemen. Because if they don't, as things stand right now, I do think it's pretty likely this team goes the 4-4 protection route, which is really more just the 8 skaters and a goalie, but that pretty much always looks like 4 forwards and 4 defensemen. If they were to trade one of those defensemen like Mattias Ekholm, then it could definitely go more the 7-3 route, but for now, we're going to stick with the roster they have and assume that that means they're going 4-4. So then as we start to get to the protection list, on the forward end, the 4 forwards I would then have them protecting would be Philip Forsberg and Matt Duchene, who I'm pretty sure are both locks, as well as Victor Arvidsson and probably at this point, Ryan Johansson. Although this would leave guys like Calle Jarnkrok and Luke Kunin available for the Predators if things continue to go the way that they have so far to this point this season, and Ryan Johansson, who so far only has 9 points in 22 games, can't get things turned around, I could see them exposing Johansson and hoping that that contract gets taken off of their hands and just going into more of a retool mode and protecting a guy like Kunin, who they just got from Minnesota. And if they do end up moving Mattias Ekholm or another one of their top 4 defensemen by the trade deadline and going the 7-3 protection route, then that probably would mean that Kunin, Jarnkrok, and right now I'd say Nick Cousins end up getting those last 3 spots on this protection list, and Johansson probably does end up on it. But on the defensive end, as things stand right now, with Ekholm still a part of this roster, there are 4 guys that are very deserving of protection spots, those being Roman Josi, who has a no movement clause, but he would be protected anyway, Ryan Ellis, Mattias Ekholm, who could end up getting traded, and then Dante Fabro. Now again, there have been plenty of trade rumors around Ekholm, and it sounds like the team is willing to move him. The question will just be if they're going to ask for too much and if no one bites. But again, as far as the defensive end protection list is concerned, if he does get moved, then they probably just protect those other 3 defensemen and go the 7-3 route. Of course, in either scenario, they still do get to protect 1 goaltender, and in either scenario, that's going to be Jose Saros. So then as we start to get to the players that could be available for the Kraken to select from, we'll start with those guys that could end up on the protection list if they do in fact protect 7 forwards. Starting with Luke Kunin, who they just acquired from Minnesota coming into the season. The 23-year-old center has now played in at least part of 4 different NHL seasons, in that time having played in 148 games where he has 57 points on 25 goals and 32 assists. And while that is at least decent points production for a young guy who has yet to see anywhere near first-line minutes, he did have a very good season last year with 31 points in 63 games, nearly a half point per game. And while at least so far anyway, he has not been able to replicate that this season, his first year in Nashville with just 5 points in 17 games, that has come with a little bit less ice time per game and a much more physical presence than what he was giving in Minnesota. Plus, when it comes to some advanced stats and those possession metrics with his Corsi for percentage, well, that definitely didn't look like what you would want it to in Minnesota, but has looked pretty good this year, all the way up to a 53.2, even though his career is still at 47.4. So with Kunin, if nothing else in Nashville this season, he has shown that he can be a pretty adaptable and flexible type of forward that can play in a number of different ways, showing that he could put up points during his time in Minnesota, and now showing that he can definitely play more of that physical puck possession type of game that you would want on a third line. Plus, again, at just the age of 23, his best years should certainly still be ahead of him, so it would be very interesting to see how he could end up developing over time if he did end up coming to Seattle, or even if he stays in Nashville. And it is largely for that reason that even if the Predators do go the 4-4 protection route, I could still see him getting one of those slots, especially if they do decide to go more of the rebuild or retooling route next season. Another guy, though, that while I'm not sure he would make a 4-4 protection list, certainly would be on a 7-3 one for the Predators, is Calle Jarnkrok. The 29-year-old, who also plays in the middle of the ice at center, has now played in at least part of 8 different NHL seasons. In that time, having played in 483 games with 198 points on 90 goals and 108 assists. Which over the course of his career is certainly not a crazy amount of points production, but he has been able to pick that up over the last couple of years with 34 points in 64 games last season and 15 points on 9 goals and 6 assists already to this point in 24 games this year. And those 9 goals do actually put him in second place for the Predators as far as goal scoring so far to this point in the season, with only Forsberg ahead of him with 10. And although he's never been one of the more physical forwards in the game, when it comes to his advanced possession metrics with his Corsi for percentage, he has looked pretty good there throughout his career, always above 50%, with the exception of the 2017-18 season, for a career Corsi for percentage of 51.2. Plus, even without a crazy amount of points production for the majority of his career, he still does have a positive expected plus-minus, with a 1.9 in his 8 seasons. With Jarnkrok, unlike Kunin, you certainly wouldn't be getting as much as far as youth is concerned, but you would be getting a guy with a decent amount of NHL experience who still does seem to be improving at the age of 29. And again, because he doesn't play quite as physical of a game and he doesn't have a history of injuries, he could still have a good few years left in him. Plus, even with him now starting to get a little bit more playing time on the second line with the Predators, even if he is doing it at wing and not at center, if he were to come to Seattle, he probably also would be getting some top line type of minutes, so he should be able to keep up that improvement in points production that he's shown over the last couple of seasons. Now again, if the Predators were to go the 7-3 protection route, that last spot, at least right now anyway, to me would probably go to Nick Cousins. I mean, maybe it would go to Jakub Trenin because he is a bit younger, but for now I'm going to say it goes to Cousins. Either way though, if exposed, Cousins might also be worth a look at from Seattle. Another guy that can play at the center position or on the wing. At the age of 27, Cousins has already played in at least part of 7 different NHL seasons, in that time having played in 353 games where he has 107 points on 44 goals and 63 assists. So at least compared to the other two that we've talked about so far, he certainly doesn't have the points production at any point in his career that either of them do. But he has spent almost his entire career on either the third or fourth line where he has not seen the amount of minutes that either of those two guys have seen. Plus what he offers that neither of them have really to this point is definitely quite a bit more physicality in his game, with 461 career hits. And while again, his career points production has definitely suffered from spending the vast majority of his time on a lower line, when it comes to his advanced stats and his possession metrics in particular with Corsi for percentage, he's actually looked pretty good there, the majority of the time being above 50% and even well above 50% in a number of seasons for a career average of 51.4. Plus, he also has a career expected plus minus of 11.3, which, considering that points production once again, is actually pretty impressive. Both of which are definitely things that you want to see from a guy who's going to be playing in a place that probably won't see the majority of the team scoring. So if he were to be the one picked up by Seattle in the expansion draft from the Predators, even with the more limited access to forwards that Seattle will have in the expansion draft, at this point in his career, you'd probably expect him to fill a similar type of role to what he's filled so far in one of those bottom line type of areas. But he could do fairly well there. Another name you may have seen thrown around a bit with the Predators is Rocco Grimaldi, another one of these hybrid forwards. The 28-year-old has now played in at least part of 7 different NHL seasons, although really only any significant time in 4 of those. The vast majority of that coming last season, where he had 31 points on 10 goals and 21 assists in 66 games. So at least last season anyway, Grimaldi did show that he can put up some points from the fourth line, although that was a bit of a change of pace from what he had done so far to that point in his career. And so far to this point this season, with a similar amount of playing time, he hasn't really been able to replicate that with just 4 points on 3 goals and an assist in 22 games. Now again, when it comes to the third and especially fourth lines, that's not usually where most teams are looking for their points production from. Usually you're just looking for a little bit more puck possession and preventing the other team from getting good chances. And when it comes to those type of stats with his Corsi for percentage and expected plus minus, he has actually looked pretty good throughout his career, and especially recently with a career expected plus minus of 1.4, which is in the positive end, and a career Corsi for percentage of 52.7, having been above 50% each of the last 3 seasons where he's seen a little bit more playing time. Now sure, with him never having averaged much above 12.5 minutes of ice time in any given season, there could still be more to Grimaldi than we can see in his stats so far to this point in his career. But again, at the age of 28, and especially considering he is a bit of a smaller player, I'm not sure how much of a breakout he would really see even if given more time. But again, it does have to be said that last year was a promising sign, even if this year really has not done much to reinforce that. Another guy that has had a similar type of story would be Colton Sissons. Though with Sissons, who at the age of 27 has also played in at least part of 7 different NHL seasons, he does have considerably more playing time at the top level, with 352 games to his name, in that time having 96 points on 50 goals and 46 assists. And it does have to be said that while Grimaldi's breakout season, if you can call it that, was last year, for Sissons, his best year was 2 years ago. But while he does add quite a bit when it comes to physicality over especially Grimaldi, but really all of the guys we've looked at so far, he does give up a bit when it comes to his advanced stats and especially his Corsi for percentage, where he has a career 47.9. But even his expected plus minus doesn't look great. That being said, if, as expected, Ron Francis and the Kraken go a little bit more the physical defensive route, at least for their first season, then this is a little bit more the type of player they might be looking for than a smaller guy like Grimaldi. Plus, while it definitely does have to be said that both Grimaldi and Sissons, who only has 4 points on 4 goals in 30 games, have not been particularly great in points production so far to this point this year, that's kind of something the Predators as a whole have struggled with, so it's hard to say how much of that is them and how much of it might just be the team as a whole. But before we move on, there are a couple of other names on the forward end at least worth mentioning, one of being Jakub Trenin, who I mentioned earlier, that maybe finds his way onto a 7-man protection list, but I honestly don't know how much that's likely. And if he were to be picked, would probably be a guy that would get stuck in the AHL to at least start off. And the other name would be Mikael Granlund, who certainly would look like a tempting option, but he is set to be a UFA at the end of the season, and unlike some of the other UFAs that I've talked about in some of the other videos, I don't think it's particularly likely that he gets extended before the expansion draft. Ultimately with Granlund, even if Nashville does want him back for next season, they probably don't need him back bad enough to spend a protection slot on him. And with that being the case, they probably would just give him maybe some sort of handshake type of deal and hope that he doesn't get a better deal in free agency after the expansion draft. Now, of course, if Ron Francis and Seattle really love Granlund in particular for some reason, they can still make him their pick from Nashville before he ever gets to free agency. But as John Barr from Sound of Hockey pointed out, picking a soon-to-be UFA player is something that when it came to the Vegas expansion draft, the Golden Knights only did in one occasion, so I wouldn't expect it to happen a whole lot of times with Seattle if they do it at all. On the defensive end for the Predators, honestly, I just don't know that there's a whole lot here that's going to be left exposed that could tempt the Kraken away from picking one of the forwards. Ultimately, the only two that could maybe end up getting exposed would be Fabro, although I think that's very unlikely, or maybe Ekholm if they don't trade him and they still decide they want to go the 7-3 route. In either case, with Fabro or Ekholm, if they are exposed, I would think that Seattle would probably take them. And then in goal, well, there's actually one interesting option here, and that's Connor Ingram. The 23-year-old goaltender still has a couple of years left before he would become an RFA. While Ingram has yet to make his NHL debut, he has looked very impressive at the AHL level over the last couple of seasons. Last year having a save percentage of .933 and a goals against average below 2 in 33 games for the Milwaukee Admirals. And while he has had a bit of a rough go in the few games he was able to play in the Swedish League this season, there still is a lot of promise that this guy could develop into a pretty good goaltender down the road, and if Seattle does end up not really seeing all that many other good options from the Predators, which probably means they go the 7-3 route in that case, then they could take him as a potential goalie for the future and let him develop for a couple more seasons in the AHL. Now that AHL goalie of the future type of role is something we've also talked about with Adin Hill in Arizona, but they could also just have Adin Hill as their backup for the pro team and have him learn that way while Ingram fits in the AHL. So in the end with the Predators, it all pretty much comes down to whether or not they end up moving Ekholm. If they do move Ekholm and go the 7-3 route, then there still are some options on the forward end, or they could go with the young goalie in Ingram. But if they stay in the 4-4 protection route that they currently look to be in right now, then there certainly would be some good options on the forward end that they could take, like for example Kunin if he's available, or maybe Jarnkrok if not. That being said, with Nashville though, there is still very much the chance that the Predators try to cut a deal rather than losing whoever the Kraken want. Now, at least to me anyway, for a deal with Nashville to happen, that would probably mean a couple of things. One, they probably weren't able to move Ekholm, which means they could lose a better forward. And two, Johansson is not able to pick things up at all over the course of the rest of the season, and the Predators become more interested in moving his contract that sees him earning $8 million over the next 5 seasons. And if after this year the Predators are looking to go into a little bit of a rebuild, or at least a retool mode for a season or two, then that is definitely an option that they would probably be looking at. And in exchange for Seattle picking Johansson and that contract, the Predators could obviously offer Seattle a prospect, or they do actually have all but their 7th round pick in this upcoming draft. Plus, they also have Colorado's 4th, and next year they have all but their 6th round pick, so they do have plenty of options when it comes to offering draft picks. Now, it does have to be said that when it comes to exchanging draft picks before this season, that could get a little bit tricky when it comes to their value, considering, well, scouting's been a little tricky with a lot of these guys that will be drafted not having played a whole lot because of COVID. But it's still something to consider, and it's not like there aren't talented players, it's just that they're harder to scout. But with that said, that will bring me to the end of this one, so if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. Plus, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Predators and who you think they'll protect, or who you think Seattle could end up getting down in the comments section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.